got Mike from another person from South Carolina. That's my home state. No pronouns given. Currently, the question is, what is the greatest threat or treat? It says treat. I guess that's a typo. Threat to separation of church and state. So let's ask Mike. Mike, do I have it right? Is it threat or treat for separation of church and state?
Maybe you got to retype there. Mine says threat.
Threat. Okay.
Treat sounds better, maybe. I don't know. I am curious what your motivation is. That's something that you said cross-examine was one of the reasons you're here. I always wonder why you guys show up to do all these, video things. It's tough enough for me to try and catch up with y'all every other week or something, and yet you're here all the time. So I'm wondering. I'm asking what your motivation is, more or less. But you said one of the problems with Christianity was you thought it was a threat to separation of church and state. Just if you could expand on that.
Well, I don't find that to be a problem with Christianity generally. I find it to be a threat with Christian nationalism, and that is distinct from Christianity. So Christians would encompass everybody who, whatever definition you want, is a Christian, and that varies from Christian to Christian. Christian nationalism is a subset of Christians who believe that they should, and they're morally, if not empowered to do so, almost compelled to take over the levers of state and use it to bring about a Christian theocratic government. One where Christianity is taught as the truth in public schools, one where Christianity is the justification for public policy. If you imagine a world in which you can be convicted of violating the statute called Leviticus 21 as a crime, that would be sort of a Christian nationalist state. So Christian nationalists are the problem, not Christians. Does that make my position clear?
Yeah, that's interesting. How do you know when you've got a Christian nationalist on your hands?
Because they say, I think we should take over the levers of state and make this a Christian nation.
But, this is founded on Christianity. When you talk about Leviticus, you've talked about people that want to bring back old school stoning everybody. Is that it? Or
there's a spectrum. I want to go back to something you just said. Like this is all founded on Christianity. I didn't understand that.
As far as the country, but before we answer that, you're concerned about them bringing back Old Testament punishments. Is that the concern, or?
No, I think I explained it before. I want to use the levers of the state to make Christianity the official religion of the government, to teach Christianity as truth into schools of public school children, to favor Christians in public dealing with the government. All of these things are part of Christian nationalism. Basically a theocracy. If you imagine the best and worst parts of theocratic governments throughout history and in our current time, that is what you're dealing with Christian nationalists.
I have never met anybody that wants Christianity to be the religion, because the Church of England is what we came from. And it's a disaster, by the way. It's throwing out the real Christians right now. The Church of England is in England. But I don't know anybody that wants Christianity.
The real Christians? What are real Christians?
Religion is just going to get. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What are real Christians? You said the Church of England is throwing out real Christians. Who are the real Christians? Are you the real Christian?
Real Christians are. That's a fair question. Real Christians are Christians that adhere to the Bible as far as Jesus, following his teachings. And then, they're not the ones.
Catholic Church would disagree. The Catholic Church, the people that gave you the Bible would say you need tradition and Bible.
Well, the Catholic Church did give us the Bible. They were teaching in Latin and trying to keep everybody confused for hundreds.
That's irrelevant. No, address the question. I don't want you to dodge this one. This is very important. You are asserting, ostensibly, that you know what a true Christian is. And every time I've talked with somebody like that, it ends up in a spot of either no true Scotsman or moving the goalposts or defining a circle that other people wouldn't agree with that appear to share the same faith. So let's talk about this. What do you mean by true Christian? You said adhere to the Bible. What do you mean?
People that follow Jesus and believe that Jesus is God in the flesh, and they follow his teachings.
And you say follow teachings, that's a fuzzy word. What do you mean by follow teachings?
Well, Jesus says to, forgive not just 7 times, but 7 times 70. When Jesus says, I'm the way.
These are examples of things Jesus said, but what I'm asking you about is, what do you mean when you say follow Jesus? You are talking about some verb thing that a human today would do. What would they do? Follow certain instructions that you think came from Jesus that are listed in the Bible, or just believe that Jesus was the Son of God and that belief in him is enough to follow him? What do you mean by follow Jesus?
I think you just nailed it. Yeah, just somebody who believes that Jesus is the Son of God, and if you don't follow him, then you're not a Christian. You're just kind of reading the Bible.
So if somebody believes that Jesus was the Son of God, that means they're a true Christian.
That's part of it, yes.
But not the whole?
I mean, Satan believes that Jesus is the Son of God. So yeah, there's a big audience that believes he's the Son of God. But believing it and following it, there's that.
Okay, so we're back at following. So now the definition you gave for following is distinct from following. So I'm trying to nail down what you mean, because this is very important. So one element appears, but not every element, appears to be believing that Jesus is the Son of God. What else is on the checklist of what I have to do to be a true Christian?
Man, I know you're a lawyer and this is your thing, but I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, we can fill in the gaps. I don't want to get into how there's 40,000 different Christian denominations. I think that's it, is asking Jesus to forgive you of your sins and then following Jesus with the rest of your life. Repent and then go sin no more if you can, but everybody does. That's what being a Christian is.
To be clear, I'm not doing lawyerly things. I'm just doing logical things. I'm just trying to understand. You made a claim. You had this throwaway line of real Christians or true Christians, and that's a big, heavy statement. So you don't get to throw that out without us asking questions. So I'm sure, Justin, you run into this all the time. The checklists I've heard are: accept that Jesus is the Son of God, checklist item 1. Maybe people will add on that believe in the afterlife or repent of your sins. That might be another thing on the checklist. But my understanding is this checklist is a 2,000-year-old debate and nobody agrees. Is my understanding correct, Justin?
Yeah, that is.
Is that an understatement?
That is the case. Even the early church had to fight it out.
Gotcha. So what are the categories that you would use, Justin? Like where would you want to go with this definitional thing? Because I think we have to define this first before we can then go back to Christian nationalism, because I don't want to get into a state of saying, well, it's not Christian nationalism because the people who are doing it are not true Christians. We need to define true Christians first. And then maybe I'll say, okay, it's not Christian nationalism, it's fake Christian nationalism, but it's still a problem.
Right. I would just refer to this as semantic fog. It doesn't actually do anything for any argument. All it does is try to muddy the waters to prevent you from getting to some sort of logical conclusion. The reality is, if you just say, here's what Christianity in general does, and I'm not going to distinguish between you, the only real Christian alive, and the other Christians. I'm going to say, here are Christians. They fit the mold of Christianity. They fit Romans 10:9 and 10. They've confessed with their mouth and they believe in their heart that Jesus Christ is Lord and he was raised from the dead and he died for their sins. They believe that stuff. That makes them a Christian. And you can argue all day about how you don't like the fact that one group requires water baptism, another group doesn't require water baptism. But the reality is, the bare minimum requirement to be a Christian is that you repent of your sins and then you confess Jesus Christ. That's the bare minimum. If you've done that, I'm willing to call you a Christian, even if I disagree with some of your secondary and tertiary opinions.
Is that fair, Mike? Is that a fair definition for you, for us to move forward?
Yeah, I think that is fair.
Okay, so using that definition, anybody who's trying to make that the official policy of any branch of the government or give favor to people who claim to believe those things, that would be Christian nationalism. And then you said, I've never met anybody that wants that. Well, you're very lucky. I think you've seen them on TV. You've heard of Project 2025. You've seen Donald Trump. You've heard of Ron DeSantis. You've heard of all these people who, and I can't go on beyond that, but you've heard of all these people. We are a charity and we can't get into electioneering. They're not running for office right now. I opened this show with an example of Christian nationalism, people trying to, with 1,000 cuts, do away with the First Amendment separation of church and state, hiring chaplains of the Christian faith, not hiring in Florida. They made them volunteers so they could avoid one type of lawsuit. Volunteers, and allowing them to come into public schools and preach to kids about the truth of Christian claims. That is the government teaching its children that Christianity is true. That is a step along the way to a theocracy. Do you think that that's problematic?
I think you're reaching. You're trying to say if they somebody has an opinion or they are a Christian, then they absolutely positively can't say anything about it. It's supposed to be, you're not supposed to, the government is not supposed to advocate a certain type of religion. Could be Christianity, could be Muslim, or they're not supposed to deter you from doing it either. So
I've got a story for you about your it could be Muslim thing, right? Hold on a second. I want to get back to that, but I want to address the point you just made before we forget about it. So this is what the Christian nationalists will say. We've just created a statute that is agnostic as to what faith, but it will be faith-based, right? So it's not that you can hire a bunch of atheist pastors or get atheist volunteers to come in and teach the atheistic point of view, right? It is just any chaplain of any faith. That's the claim. That's how they write the law. They did that in Australia in 2011. The Australian population at that time was about 65% Christian. And they made the same claims then. This is not about Christianity. This is about counseling and faith-based stuff and all of that. I'll give you one guess as to what percentage years later, after they'd hired all of these chaplains or accepted them as volunteers, keeping in mind that the population of Australia was 65% Christian, what percentage of the chaplains were in schools were Christian? Do you have any idea what that number was?
I have no idea.
97%.
I don't know where you're going with this. So
where I'm going is what I hear time and time again is you're being alarmist. That's a categorical error. This is not Christian nationalism. This is just one local law. Because it's any faith could be a chaplain, therefore it's not Christian nationalism. This is all cover, and it is documented time and time again throughout history, and in Australia is a very good analog. They have a very conservative part of their population. They are very independent, like the United States. They still have that sort of frontiersman attitude. They made all the same promises that the people in Texas, the people in Florida, the people in Oklahoma are making as to why we should allow chaplains in schools. They swore it would be multi-denominational, and then after the law was passed, the rubber on the road, the people pulling the levers, made it a basically uniform all Christian chaplaincy preaching to kids in their schools, in government schools. That is against what the founding fathers wanted. They explicitly made a law before the Constitution even existed in Virginia to fight this sort of shit. And then they embodied that law, the Bill for Religious Freedom and for the Virginia colony, into the First Amendment. And ever since then, Christians who want government to force religion down their citizens' throats have been trying to get away with these sorts of things. And it is only since the current Supreme Court came into power due to Mitch McConnell's shenanigans that they are now getting what they want. They are getting a death by 1,000 cuts of the First Amendment for this exact purpose. To put it another way, if they didn't want the government involved, they wouldn't be doing any of this, but they are. That's my point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can't. I can think of a million things that'd be a lot worse than this. Somebody talking about the Bible, but to your original point, in Australia, they passed this law and said they could have people talking about religion. And
let's clarify, you're softening this. This is not people talking about religion. These are pastors, explicitly chaplains, hired or volunteering to give counseling to students who need counseling instead of trained counselors. Here's an anecdote from Australia. A girl who was suffering from an eating disorder went to her chaplain because it was the only counselor available. And you know what he told her? You're just hungry for the Lord. That's the counseling she got. That is one story out of a million. There's a whole bunch of papers in Australia about this. When the rubber meets the road, this is what happens. And the reason we have laws against even letting it start happen is because eons of experience have shown to us that when you let it creep in a little, if you give a definitional excuse for it to happen, all of a sudden the doors are wide open, everybody runs in and starts. It's like cigarette companies marketing to kids. They know they want to get them early. The National Association for School Chaplains is in their mission statement says, we want to get people into schools so we can convert them to being Christians. This is not a mystery. We want the power of the school letting us trap a captive audience and preach to them about the truth of Jesus. This is not people talking about the Bible in an academic sense. I am all for a comparative religions class in public schools. I think the Bible should be in schools in those contexts. Let's read the Bible. Let's read the Quran. Let's read any text and compare and contrast with poetry and with other mythology. That's great, but that's not what this is. This is, you're a kid in distress. You would go see a counselor, but instead you're going to Pastor Jack, who's going to tell you you're just hungry from the Lord and you need to pray to Jesus. That's what's happening in the schools. After Australia did this, years after, STDs in schools went up, teen pregnancies went up, and it was all because the pastors were discouraging the kids from sex education, safe sex, all of those things. You can't deny what happens on the ground when you let this stuff into the door.
A couple things on the STDs and all that. You're sure about that? You got your data on that? That it was the only mitigating factor?
I'll give it to you. Let's say that never happened. Continue. I don't have it at my fingertips. That's what I remember from my research. I did a whole episode on this, but I might be wrong on some facts. Continue.
Sure, I can see something changes, and then there's unintended side effects. Sure, but I mean, it'd be nice to prove it. All right.
If you're going to throw away these sentences, let's go back to the South. What is the cause and effect here? The more religious a state is in the United States, the higher the STD rates, the higher drug addiction rates, the higher divorce rates, the higher the teen pregnancies rates. Every measure of health is lower. Now, I am readily going to admit we don't know which way the causation arrow goes, but I do know it's been that way since pre-Civil War. That everywhere we look in the world, every country, every world, where we keep religion out of schools, where we teach good health, where we teach science, where we teach sex ed, all of those metrics get better. So let's not throw away these little lines about, well, maybe this one stat's wrong, maybe that one stat's wrong. We know what's happening. The conservative Christian movement for decades has openly said we want to put Jesus back in schools. We want the power of the government, which in the 60s we were forced to retreat from because we used to read Christian pairs in schools and tell people that they need to be Christian in schools. And the Supreme Court told us we couldn't do that. They have been working for decades to change that, and they have now done so, and they are putting chaplains in school who are going to do exactly what happened in Australia. And if you don't accept that, then you're either naive or you're in on it.
Okay. Now, wait a minute. Is it only Christian pastors are allowed in Australia, and only Christian are allowed?
No, as I said, the bill is written to get past the critics. It's written to say anybody can apply. But what happens when the rubber hits the road? 97% of the pastors, of the counselors in Australia ended up being Christian when the population was 65% Christian. That's not by accident. It's not because the Muslims didn't apply. It's the bureaucracy takes care of a lot of the, they just didn't qualify, or they just weren't interested, right?
Bureaucracy, and maybe you're right. But you're saying, wait a minute, they're screening out non-Christians. That's a different claim. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying there's two facts. One, they made the argument that this is okay because the legislation was non-denominational. And fact two is, in the end, what they said would happen, which we would have multi-faith representation across the schools, did not happen. We only had Christian representation. You can be the judge as to why that happens, but I think if you're going to ask anybody to believe that that was just, oopsie, a statistical anomaly that we see elsewhere around the world, I think people are not going to buy that.
What's stopping the atheists from going there and speaking to the kids and counseling?
They're not.
Well, then I'm
not stopped.
You're saying. Well,
I'm saying none of us should be going in and talking about religion to public school students. That has nothing to do with the government.
When did atheists get chaplains?
What's your take? We have been going back and forth. I'm sorry. What's your take, Justin?
I'm loving the conversation. This is in your wheelhouse, and I love it. But I'm confused about why you would think atheists are going to go into schools and teach kids about atheism.
Yeah, I would never presume to go into a public school and tell kids you shouldn't believe that a God exists. I would never in my wildest dreams think that that was appropriate, morally okay, on many levels, governmental wise or parent wise, right? But Christians are doing it to students with the power of the government.
We leave the brainwashing to the religious cults. We don't do that.
I don't. Well, I mean, you guys can go and say be skeptical. Wouldn't that be a nice counterbalance if you went in there? If you got time for this, don't you have time?
They don't need that.
No, the government shouldn't be involved in it. Sorry, go ahead, Justin. I need to comment.
You don't need an atheist specifically to teach students to analyze things properly. Like a good foundation in science and a good foundation in logic, which should be part of the curriculum, will already take care of that. You don't need representatives from atheismo coming into the schools to do that.
Atheismo, I like that.
Apparently you do. If you're outnumbered 97% to 3, you guys better get in there. I mean,
okay. Now I'm not taking you seriously, Mike. I'm not taking. I don't think we can take Mike seriously after that. Really?
Yeah, I don't. Mike, why do you think our goal is to make everybody an atheist?
I think your goal.
Like you have so many assumptions about our worldview. You don't even know our worldview.
I was asking you about it. I was like, what? Why do you care about Christian nationalists? And then
because I don't want the government. I don't want the government giving tax breaks to only Christians. I don't want the government telling my child that they're going to go to hell if they don't accept Jesus. I don't know why this is so hard.
That's not what you said before. You never talked about
that. Is exactly what I said. I'm just giving you actual examples.
Your actual examples were writing laws for Christians and having a theocracy. I don't want.
What do you think taxes? What do you think tax breaks come from?
Government.
Those are laws. Come on now, Mike. Come on. Tax breaks for Christians is a legislative event, right? Allowing people to teach that Jesus is true comes from the law, right? The legal system has to allow it, especially because we've tried for 200 and whatever years to prevent it. So to overcome that, it takes a very concerted effort to do so. And it's all out in the open. It's all out in the open. You can go read Project 2025. You can go read all of the conservative Christian movements that have been trying to do this non-stop. And it is finally a point where they have a foothold and we need to sit up like prairie dogs and pay attention. That's my point. If you honestly agree with me that the government should not be teaching, let's start with this. Do you agree that the government should be neutral as far as religion goes? It shouldn't opine as to the truth of a religion. It shouldn't favor one religious group over another. Do you agree with that?
I think we covered that with the First Amendment, separation of church and state. Yeah, I believe in that. They shouldn't be pro for it and advocating a certain religion, and they shouldn't be holding you back either. So yes.
Right. Now, what does holding back look like? Does saying, hey, we're not going to have government employees teaching children that the Bible is true. If we say that's the rule, government employees cannot on the clock as part of a classroom class teach that the Bible is true. Is that separation of church and state that's proper, or is that somehow holding Christianity back?
I think you got a point there. I think teaching that it's true, now they've crossed the line. I would agree with that.
Okay, that's what I'm against. I think, Justin, you're against it too, I think.
Yeah, I'm against it too.
Yeah. I'm not pro indoctrination for the kids. I think
Of any religion,
is
not just Christian, right?
Yeah. I
Like
think
you wouldn't
religion,
want a Muslim going in and doing it, right, Justin?
no,
Would you want an
I
atheist
think that's
going in and doing
something.
it?
No, this is something for your home. This is something that if your parents don't have the balls to teach you their religion, then that's on them. But I think when it comes to like matters of faith and things like that, that's your parents' job. It's not the job of the schools to try to create religious adherence.
Holy cow, I agree with you guys.
Listen,
I'm
all for freedom of religion, by the way. Just to be clear, Mike, I'm all for. I don't want to stop anyone from having the freedom of religion, but I do want to not have it forced on people, especially not our kids. And I want people to be able to learn to think critically. That's what I want.
Yeah, I got two reasons that I don't want it forced on. First of all, if we turn into a theistic government, they're going to screw it up and they're going to teach garbage and get off course like immediately in 20 years or less.
Yes.
And then the other one is it opens the door to every other religion. I'm not a big fan of Islam. I don't like how they treat everybody. So.
And those are fair. I will quote Thomas Jefferson. I referenced this in a rant earlier, but pre-Constitution, so after Declaration of Independence, pre-Constitution, Virginia is considering a bill, a law, that would say, hey, we're going to take some money and hire teachers of the Christian faith to go teach Christianity in public schools in the colony of Virginia. Jefferson, Madison, and others rose up against it, wrote these, what's called a protest and demonstrance against the bill. And the bill was suspended. The consideration of the bill was suspended for a year while they published their papers and argued it. And Jefferson introduced the bill I referenced, which is a bill for religious freedom. And the bill says basically, you can't spend money, like the government can't tax people to then take that money and use it to teach the truth of a religious faith, whatever religious faith that would be. And he made a very important point that I think will resonate with you, Mike. He said, even if the government, and I'm quoting him very loosely here, using some made up fancy language, even if the government would take the monies out of my pocket to give them to a preacher of my own faith, that government is depriving me of giving the money to that preacher whose particularities I might agree with. And what he meant by that was, if I'm a Protestant and you're teaching Protestantism and you're taxing me to pay for that, that's still tyranny. He used the word tyranny when he described that, because he's pointing out, you're depriving me of my ability to choose the preacher down at the preacher level that I might agree with on any particularity. And this is why when Texas introduced a chaplain bill, the very first lawsuit that was filed, the plaintiff was a preacher, a Christian preacher in Texas. This is the point. It's not just when you're in the in-group that you have to worry. It's okay, we make Christianity the official religion, and all of a sudden they adopt the Catholic Bible, and everybody disagrees with that. In fact, that actually happened in Louisiana. They voted to make the Holy Bible, or they passed a bill, or were considering a bill, to make the Bible the official book, the official crap they come up with states, the official book of Louisiana, and that measure ended up collapsing because nobody could agree on which version of the Bible should be the official version. And that's where separation of church and state comes into play, not as between atheist and religious people, not as between Muslim and Christian, but from this preacher to that preacher. Jefferson says, even making that difference, the government distinguishing that or favoring that is tyranny. And that would be the point of why we don't want the first toe over the line towards Christian nationalism.
Except if it's volunteer, then you're on it's a toe. But I don't know. I'm not going to defend that. I do agree with keeping the government and the any religion separate. And that Project 2025 and Trump and all, I think you'd be lucky to find. 2025. I thought that was dead. That was like a propaganda thing. Trump's going to go.
I can't use names, but a certain highest level official mentioned it last week and called it great after denying that he knew anything about it during the election. Search the news.
Yeah, but nobody's doing anything. They've had
what?
No. There's a website dedicated to tracking every policy proposal in that document. They're currently 48% complete with all of the proposals in the document.
Do you know that website?
Google Project 2025 Tracker, I think is I don't remember the exact name, but I'll give you a
very good.
I'll give you a high press example. Okay. My area of practice in the law when I practiced law was FDA regulatory law, right? Project 2025 talks about FDA, Health and Human Services, all of those people, and says, all agencies basically, and says, what we need to do is get rid of the experts and install loyalists who will try to push for these particular agendas. And they are very smart in Project 2025. They do not mention the word Christian except for 2 or 3 times. They talk in sort of abstract language. But when you look at the organization that created Project 2025,
that was dumb.
Well, the Heritage Foundation came from a group of conservative Christians who were pissed off at Nixon because he wasn't conservative and Christian enough. So that's the people that wrote Project 2025. And now when you look at what they've done is they have gotten rid of expertise at every level. They have fired many people I've known who work at the FDA who know what they're doing, and they've installed morons who are loyalists. This is what you do when you want to bring down the guardrails of a government. And I used to respect the FDA. I argued against them. My clients were people who would have problems with the FDA. They were importers of goods that thought they were being too strict or whatever. But I respected them immensely. Every single one of them were experts, had high-level degrees, and their chief concern above all else was the health and safety of the drugs, medicine, cosmetics, medical devices of not only the U.S., but the world, because they knew the heavy burden they bore, that many countries piggyback off of FDA regulations because they don't have a sophisticated science program in their country. So they just say, we'll do whatever the FDA does. And that is being destroyed as not a goal of Christian nationalism, but as a goal to weaken the guardrails and expertise in the government itself. And if you look everywhere throughout the government, that is what's going on. And meanwhile, they are enacting regulations and policies, executive orders that are pushing religion into government. And the Supreme Court, it was specifically created by McConnell to facilitate that. And they've already struck down the Lemon Rule, which was used for decades to separate church and state. This Supreme Court has done away with that. And now they're using basically made up bullshit that nobody can agree upon what they actually mean when they write about it. So Project 2025 is very real. Please do go research it. It's one of its many goals is towards Christian nationalism, but its main goal is weaken expertise in government and install loyalists who will look the other way when we try to do the other stuff.
Hey, question for you. Do you think that the FDA is like impervious to corruption, like by Pfizer or anybody else? You think no?
Not at all.
No to money, like all of them.
Well,
no, I don't think so.
Can I talk to you a little bit about that first? I actually, not to say too much about my past life as an engineer, but I actually worked with the pharmaceutical companies that have to go through FDA approval. I personally have multiple machines that I've designed have to go through FDA approval. And it's a very robust process. I'm not saying that somebody couldn't get paid off or corrupted, but it's a very robust process. The amount of checks that are in balance aren't just because the government wants checks and balances. It's because the insurance companies that have to cover the liabilities for the manufacturers need the checks and balances too. So there's a whole supporting cast outside of the FDA with checks and balances and procedures in place that one rogue FDA employee is not likely going to poo-poo the whole process. In fact, there was a deadline we missed for a project way back in like 2016. We just missed a deadline. We couldn't get it on time. We had to wait another 2 years to get FDA approval because that was just how the process worked. They weren't going to bend for us. It didn't matter how much money we had.
Well, I mean, I've got an experience with that too. A friend of mine, it took him over a decade to get something approved, FDA and all that. So yeah, I mean, there's that.
It's hard. It's
I
hard.
readily accept that government capture, agency capture exists in every agency at every level, just same way that insurance fraud happens at all insurance companies, and the same way that welfare fraud happens in all welfare systems, and food aid fraud happens in all systems. That's just a given. What you do is you do the calculus, right? You optimize the curve of how much effort you're going to put in to trap and catch the bad stuff without spending too much, right? We don't want to spend, it costs 1,000,000% more to catch the 98th or 99th percent of fraud. And it just at some point isn't worth it. And I recognize that. I'm not an idealist, but the FDA works. The world follows the FDA. Our engineers work. The engineering system works. Our buildings don't fall down like they do elsewhere. Our roads work. Our electrical grid works. Is it perfect? No, but it not being perfect isn't a reason to say we shouldn't have experts. It's always open to capture.
Hey,
that's
I'm not
human
backing-
nature. You put enough internal affairs resources into trying to capture most of it, and you get on with your life.
All right. Hey, I got a last thing, but we won't talk about it probably. Out in Europe, UK, this is for you, Cross-Examine. This a couple of months ago, we talked about how they're clamping down on free speech. You said you might look into it. Did you have a chance to look into that at all?
I have not. I have not had time. I don't recall. To be honest, I don't recall that conversation. So maybe you could remind me.
Oh, it was a throwaway comment, but I was like, oh man, I understand you can't pray next to an abortion clinic. It's
that's not true. That's not true. That was debunked. That story was debunked. What happens, just like in the US, what happens is something happens, right? And the headline will be person arrested for praying, right? Or person arrested for being an atheist, whatever. Like that's the headline that goes everywhere. And then you dig into the details and you realize, oh, it wasn't for praying. It was for trespassing. Or they were violent or something like that. And in this particular case where I want to say London, I don't remember, in England, somebody was arrested and the headline from the conservative press was person arrested for praying. But when you dig into it, if I recall correctly, it was trespassing or violence. They'd been warned before. It wasn't for praying. It was for what they were doing while praying. So always be skeptical of headlines on either end of the spectrum, because what sells? Blood, death, and sex. That's what sells. So they're not going to be honest in their headlines at all on any side of the spectrum.
It's new now. They're sending out clips of guys preaching, and if they say something about the Bible or anti-Islamic, then they're saying you're causing distress, and they're getting warnings. And after the warning, then they come in and they, take you down, and they're
go ahead and create a website. Post all of that stuff, make the world know about it. I think in the process of doing that, I'm going to be your first supporter if that's going on. Really, legitimately, that's what's going on. But I think in the process of doing that and diving into that content, rather, I don't depend on TikToks and memes. Go look at the studies, go pull up the court documents, look at the records of the police file, see what actually happened. And I'd be willing to bet a decent amount of money that what's going on is you may have one or two cases of overzealous cops, right? You see it all the time in the United States. Cops come up and arrest people on the street for taking pictures in public, and that's totally legal, but they arrest them, and then that county gets sued and they lose the lawsuit because it's constitutional. So there's going to be some percentage of that anywhere you give anybody a badge for any reason. But in the process of investigating that and creating your website of England is now arresting people for praying, I would be willing to bet that you will find that they're demonstrating without a license, like anybody. If they're talking about anti-nuclear preaching, it has nothing to do with the content of their speech and has to do with the time, manner, place of their behavior. I'd be willing to bet, but
but it doesn't look like that. Thank you.
I know it doesn't. I know it doesn't. Isn't that fascinating how the information you're getting doesn't look like that, but the information I get looks different. We are both getting information from the algorithm. I'm being fed facts that are different than you are being fed facts. And I'm not saying my facts are right. I'm saying go look at the actual documentation and and read up on that before you accept whatever the algorithm's feeding you. Because what I've learned over the last 4 or 5 years is I used to assume that you and I, or somebody who's a pro-MAGA guy, whatever, we were seeing the same facts and coming to different conclusions. I no longer believe that. I believe that through the algorithm and now upcoming AI slop, you and I are seeing different facts. And that explains why we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. So the way I fight that is I go look at original documents, go look at the actual documents. Don't rely on a TikTok video. Don't rely on a meme. Don't rely on a video that somebody posted on Facebook. You can learn very easily how to go find the court documents, find neutral reporting, and go and look at what actually happens in the long run, because the story you get from the witnesses on the street on day one are going to be very different from what the person confesses to, admits to, testifies to when they actually are under oath. So I have tried to cut myself off from the algorithm. I suggest you do too. Go to the original documents. And then if you've got something, the world, including us, the Atheist Community of Austin, supports the separation of church and state. We would be utterly against that behavior. However, I suspect we will find what we usually find, which is a few crazy cops and a bunch of people getting arrested for behavior, not for the content of their speech. But we do have to go on.
I hope you're right.
Justin, this has sort of been my call. I'm so sorry about that. Do you have anything to add before Mike drops off?
I loved it. It was like watching a master chef create his favorite recipe.
And Mike's been great. Mike, you're a great interlocutor. I really appreciate your questions. I do really think that you make some good arguments and observations. And I do want to hear back from you.
Yeah. Hey, what did you call me? Interlocutor? We were doing something.
Interlocutor. It's the person you're sort of conversing with or debating.
I know. That's a good word. I like it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. We really appreciate it.